Hel- Hello, welcome you all. Myself MP Mishra, Faculty, School of Computer and Information Sciences. I am with you in this session with a topic that is exceptions handling in Java. This is one of the important topic as far as programming in Java is concerned, and why this is important, that also we will discuss in this session, and we will try to see that how actually we practice to write our program in such a way that we handle the expected exceptions properly, and our program is much more smooth and robust in a sense that in the case of exceptions also it close gracefully and it provide the kind of input or indication to the user of the program that there is something which has happened and that is a kind of abnormal thing. Due to that, your normal process of execution could not complete it. So let us move further, and if we talk about exception, so exception is nothing but it is some kind of abnormal condition which occur during the execution of the program, and that particular occurrence of the exception basically helps the program to divert from its normal flow. It means it disturbs the normal flow of the execution of the program. The point where exception occur, from that point onward the control of the flow is not there. The control of the flows goes to some other place where some mechanism is there to handle the exception, or there is some default mechanism of the JVM which handle that particular exception, and the program terminate abnormally. And as far as the programming aspect is concerned, exception can be seen as an object which is generated as a result of some kind of error or some unexpected event. Now, if some kind of unexpected event is happening, then how we can handle that particular event? This is the question. And to answer that question, it is essential for us to understand that it is not in our hand as a programmer to handle all the unexpected events or something which is happening and it is not in our control, so that we cannot do. But something which is expected to be happened or something which is a kind of logical problem in the programming, so those all things we can handle, and on the basis of that we can make a smooth program. Basically, exception handling provide a kind of environment or mechanism to us to make our program much more smoother and much more robust, in a sense that even if some kind of errors or some kind of unexpected condition is happening, so your program is not going to crash. And if program is not going to crash, then what? Then definitely it is not that program is going to do all the activities expected from the program, because normal flow of the execution of the program is obviously disturbed and interrupted, and it cannot happen. Then what can happen? You can gracefully exit from the program just by indicating that some abnormal conditions has happened, and due to that the normal flow of the execution cannot be performed, or you can indicate some kind of activities which to be done to take care of that particular, and after coming out of that particular exceptional condition you may go for other section of the program to perform the activities. It means instead of crashing the program in a normal flow or in a normal sequence of the flow, if some exception happening at a specific point or moment in your program, and from there you are coming out of that particular exception condition and managing that particular exception, and subsequently you are willing to perform some other activities, that also you can do. We will see how we do it. And as far as Java is concerned, Java is a very strong programming language in terms of providing the facility of exception handling. So Java provide us facility to manage exception. Now, before we move further, let me see some reasons or some cause of different exceptions. It may be that you are providing some invalid data and that invalid data may not be processed. So that invalid data may be in terms of the syntax of the language itself, or it may be the semantic error. Syntax error, you can see that if you are writing something and that particular thing is not in normal sequence or normal handling of that particular sequence is proper, then obviously you are doing some kind of error, and that particular error you have to handle. For example, if you are having an array, let us say one array you are having of size 5 and you are trying to access the 6th element in that. So that is a kind of logical error. So that error you have to handle, and that is handled with the help of one exception named array index out of bound. So there are different exception objects which are inbuilt or which are provided by the exception hierarchy or exception classes in the Java. That detail you can go through the material and get. Here in this session I will try to explain the basic concepts around which the exception handling or the programming is done with the help of the mechanism of exception handling. One more aspect of logical writing of the program may cause the exception. For example, suppose if you are going to write a program in that you are going to enter age. Obviously, we know the age cannot be a negative number. So this is very basic understated principle. If that kind of thing is happening, then you should have a proper mechanism in your program to handle that particular situation and provide a kind of guidance or input to the either user or to the next sequence of the execution that this particular thing is wrong and this should be handled properly. And few more reasons of the exception are shown on your screen, like file not found, file is not opening properly, and file is not closed, network connection problem is there, and in the middle of communication network has been interrupted, thread interrupted. In one session I discussed about that if you are going to use sleep method, it is must for handling that particular thread interrupted exception. Similarly, SQL or JDBC, if you are going to use, in that also you are going to use the concept of exception handling extensively, because many operations of the SQL or JDBC SQL combined need handling of different kind of exception, whether SQL connection problem is there or some kind of query related issue are there. Similarly, different IO issues, as I mentioned, file related issues, that particular file not found may be in the category of IO issue. So if some IO device related problem is there, that also may cause some exception. And some other internal problem may be that there is no sufficient memory and your JVM is running out of memory, so you may get the cause of that particular exception, and that exception may interrupt or may cause your program to crash. So in that case, instead of crashing the program abnormally, you can manage that particular with the help of certain mechanism, and that certain mechanism is nothing but exception handling. Now question arises that can we handle all the kind of eventualities or all the kind of the exceptional conditions? So answer is a big no. You can handle some type of exceptions, and that I will discuss later on, what kind of exception we can handle and what we cannot handle, what is not in our hand at all, and in the coding part we cannot do anything. For example, if network connection is breaking, in that case we cannot do anything, we can do just graceful exit from there. So exception handler we have to use for the purpose of exception handling, and we will see that how actually exception handler we create. So process of interpreting the response of the exception is called exception handling. If some exception is occurring and how actually you are going to handle that particular exceptional condition, that particular whole process will be known as exception handling process. And it is very clear to us, or it should be very clear to us, that for all different kind of exception we require different kind of exception handling code or exception handling requirement of our specific program. It is not that for all the kind of exceptions you will be doing only one thing. So it is up to the program need, and it is up to the type of exception which is expected to occur in that specific context of the program, that we have to take care. And if we are not doing anything, the default exception handler of the JVM will handle that particular exception, and obviously some message you will get, and that particular message will be telling that at so and so place some kind of exception happen, and your program will crash or it will just terminate abnormally. The default execution of the handler print error message, as I said, and it crashed the program. Now let me see that how we can do exception handling, or what is the basically exception handler mechanism in the Java. So here you can see one try block is there, and this particular try block with the keyword try, and inside that particular curly braces whatsoever is written, those all code are under observation for some kind of exception to occur. It means whatsoever we are putting inside the try block, it is an expectation that the code written inside that may cause some kind of exception, and that particular exception if caused or it has been thrown, then how that particular will be handled, that we have to take care in the next block, that is known as catch block, that we will be discussing soon. So in try block whatsoever we are keeping, that particular we are keeping just for the sake of observation, that if some exception happens in that particular block, then we will come out of that block and we will do treatment as per our specific requirement to handle the exceptional situation. Now catch, this particular catch block, you can see in this one parameter is passed, and that parameter is exception type and obviously the object, because as we discussed, exception is event, and that particular event is represented in the form of object in Java programming. So that particular object we will write, and if that object is matching as per the exception thrown from the try block, then this particular catch block will be executed. And inside this catch block whatsoever we have written, that particular has been written to manage that particular exceptional condition. So if one exception occurred, let us say exception E1, so on the basis of the occurrence of that particular exception E1, what is your stand to take care of that particular exception E1? For that you will write a catch block. Inside that catch block you will write some programming code to manage that particular exception situation, or you will simply display some message that this particular exception has occurred, and you will come out of that particular block. And one thing is obviously there, the catch block will be executed only if some exception is thrown. If your sequence of execution is normal inside the try block and there is no exception occurred luckily, then there will not be any execution of the different catch blocks, because catch blocks are going to catch the exceptions which occur in the try block. So if exception is not occurring, then that catch block will not be executed. Then one important block comes, that is the finally. So in a program code, if there are multiple possibility of occurrence of multiple type of exception in a particular sequence of code or in a try block, then obviously you will be having multiple catch for handling the different exception objects. So those all different catch will help you to manage different kind of exception, and only that catch block will be executed to which the exception has been thrown, or which is exactly matching the type of the exception which has been thrown from the try block. And finally block is used for some kind of cleaning up process or some kind of code which you definitely need to be executed before your program terminates. So finally block is a kind of block which is definitely going to execute in your program no matter whatsoever exception occur, and even if exception don't occur, this finally block is going to be executed. So finally block should be used for the purpose of some kind of, let us say if you are using JDBC connection, so closing of that particular connection, if you are using some file, so to close that particular file, or if you are having some kind of socket open in network communication, to close that particular socket, or something of that type which is managing the resources of the whole processing activity related to that particular program. Those all things you can do so that abnormal termination of the sequence of the events in your program don't cause problem to your handling of different resources. And obviously only one finally block should be there in a program. So this is the whole sequence you can see on the screen. This particular sequence is showing you the try block. Inside that you are having code that may throw the exception. Then you will have catch block. There may be more than one catch as per the expectation of different type of exceptions that may be thrown. And then there may be one finally block to have the code which is definitely going to execute. Now you see this particular program. This is a very simple and popular program or problem which is used for explanation of the exception handling. And this particular program is talking about some basic arithmetic operation. If you are adding two integers, then definitely there is no problem. You can add any two integer. If you are similarly subtracting from one to other, that there is no problem. In multiplication also there is no logical problem, but when you are going to divide, then you take care of one thing, that your divisor should not be 0. This is a definition, and this particular definition basically says that if you are dividing any integer by 0, it is undefined or it is not having any logical meaning, so it should not be there. So if that is happening, so that particular is a exception, and that exception will be thrown by your system, and that exception is called arithmetic exception. So that arithmetic exception will be thrown if you are trying to divide one integer by 0. And in this program you can see, in this program you are having one catch block. That particular catch block is expected to get one exception that is of type arithmetic exception. So once that particular situation arises that you are trying to divide by 0, that arithmetic exception will be thrown and your code of the execution will not proceed further, and you will come out of the try block. And in the catch, if you are having provision for that particular handling of the exception, you will be able to handle that particular sequence of event, and then finally you can do some more activities and you can gracefully exit from the program. If you are not going to use try and catch in your program to handle such situation, your program will be terminated abnormally, and the default exception handler of the JVM will manage that particular, and it will show that at which place that particular exception has occurred, or in which block of the code the exception is occurred, and what is the exception. So that will be a kind of abnormal situation, and to come out of that abnormal situation you can do this particular normal sequence of activity of exception handling. If you run this particular code, you will see a very beautiful result, and that particular result will show you that how gracefully even in that abnormal situation you come out of the whole sequence of execution. Whole activities has been executed, and at the place where you are trying or you are attempting to divide by 0, their exception has occurred, then definitely it will come to the catch block, and whatever code is written in the catch block, that will be executed, and after completion of the catch block, the finally block has been executed. Now when we are going to do programming using exceptions handling mechanism or incorporating exceptions handling mechanism, then it is very essential for us to know that what is the actual layout of whole exception handling process or environment in the Java. So in Java we know every object is derived from the core, that is object class. So from object class one throwable class is created, and from throwable class two different classes are created, that is one error and other exception. So in this you can see the diagram, the error class objects thrown or error class object generated during program execution cannot be managed or cannot be handled. So they are not handled by the programmer. Programmer cannot write any code for error conditions, because error conditions are not part of the whole programming practice. it may happen due to external reasons, and that is beyond the control of the programmer. So no skill of the programming can manage the error condition. Then obviously the exception can be handled, and in exception also, if some IO exception is coming, that also cannot be handled by the programming code. What can be handled by the programming code is the runtime exception. So whatsoever exception objects may be generated or may be arise due to different exceptional conditions due to runtime exception category or belonging to runtime exception category, those only can be handled by the programmer. So this is also known as the exception hierarchy. In this hierarchy, our more interest should be to study, to know more about the runtime exception, and beyond that whatsoever different exception classes are created. So in your material, the detail of those things are given. You just go through that particular diagram given in your material, and there you can learn that how actually different exceptions are there and how those different exceptions are handled during code writing in your program. Now on the basis of that diagram, we can categorize the exception in two categories. One is the unchecked exception and other is the checked exception. Unchecked exceptions are that exceptions which cannot be avoided by properly writing program code. It means program code cannot be written for that particular, no matter how good program code you are writing. These are those exceptions that are derived from error class or runtime exceptions. So if runtime exceptions are coming, and that cannot be handled. Exception derived from the error class are thrown when a critical error occurs and should not be handled. Should not be handled here simply means that we cannot write code for that. Runtime exceptions serve as a superclass for exceptions that result from programming error. So this last line is very important for us as a learner of the Java programming, that runtime exceptions will belong to those all exceptions types or exception classes which belong to the programmer, or programmer have to manage those things as per specific situations or specific conditions of the program code writing. Now if we go for checked and unchecked exception here, so we can say that if the code in a method may throw a checked exception, the method must handle that exception, or it must have a throws class listed in the method header so that it is indicating to the compiler that this particular method is expected to throw some exception. So here we are arguing that if we are going to use a specific method or we are going to implement a specific method, and we know that this particular method is having certain code and that code is expected to throw some exception, then either we have to handle that particular exception by using the try catch mechanism, or we can use the throws keyword and then we can write the exception class name, and we can write more than one exception class name just by comma separated. Here you can see how. In next slide I will show you how. So an exception is an object, and if that particular object is created and it is having its own hierarchy, so all the exception classes in the hierarchy are derived from that throwable, and error exceptions are derived from, errors and exceptions both are derived from throwable. Now throwable was dividing the exception in two categories. One was the error, another was the exception, and again exception also divided the things in two categories. One was the IO exception, another was the runtime exception. So we are more interested in runtime exception, and in any case if any exception is going to occur in the category of runtime exception, that either we have to handle or we have to throw using the throws class. Now here see, if that particular checked exception, checked means for that we can write our own code to handle. So in that case, if we are going to create, let us say, our own method, then that will be its own return type, that is the access modifier, then the return type, then the name of the method, then throws clause will be used, and then the name of those exception classes will be written here, or the type of those exceptions will be written here by comma separated. It means if a code is expecting to return or throw more type of exceptions, so all those type of exceptions will be written and the method will be implemented. Now, whose responsibility is to manage this particular exception if that particular method which we are implementing is not having mechanism to handle it? It is the responsibility of that code which is going to call or which is going to use this particular method to perform the operation. There this particular exception should be handled. Either you handle these exceptions in the place of implementation of that method itself, which is going to throw or may generate those exceptions. Otherwise, using throws clause, you indicate that this particular method is going to throw this, and accordingly you make provision where you are going to use this method to handle those exceptions. Now, if your code is going to call a method and that particular method specifies that it is going to throw one or more exception, you must have to handle that particular exception somehow, or just by adding throws you can pass this particular exception handling to some other section of the code which is going to further use that particular method. So in that process you can make a chaining, but your chain somewhere have to stop, somewhere have to break, otherwise your exception handling mechanism will not be satisfied, and no matter at which level of the different implementation of different methods some exception is happening, that cannot be handled. Error, as I said, error is not in the programmer's control. It may be internal error, Java virtual machine error, or it may be the error due to external fault of some IO related activities, or it may be the memory problem. And application should not try to handle these errors because they are not in the hand of the programming code. Repeatedly I am saying that those things cannot be handled, and programmers should handle the exceptions that are instance of classes that are derived from exception classes, and even in that also the runtime exception classes. So here is the difference between the exception and error is given, that I have covered in my discussion. Now let me see use of throw. Throw is also a mechanism that is providing you capability to throw some your own exception. If your exceptional condition is arising, as I discussed about that, you can throw a condition when you are getting the age negative. So throw is used for that. For that you can use the throw keyword, and then you can create the exception object by using the new and then exception object. So you will be creating that particular exception object. In that you will be passing some string argument to say that what kind of exception this is, and by using the throw statement you can throw that particular exception out of the try block. Let us see how it happens. Throw, then if it is expected to throw, let us say, index out of bound, then you can create that particular object using this particular constructor of the index out of bound class, and in that you are passing one argument that index of the array is out of range. So this message you are throwing at a specific condition when that particular exception is occurring. So that condition you will be checking, then only you can know. It means you have to use some kind of logic, that is whether you will be using some switch statement or if statement to check that whether the condition is normal or abnormal. If condition is abnormal and it is exceptional condition, you can throw some exception object accordingly. Now you see in this particular program code, this particular program code is trying to check whether age variable that is of integer type is having positive or negative value stored in it. If the age is negative, it is going to throw one message that the age is negative. So here you can see that particular has been shown in different color, throw new exception, and that in that you have passed one array, age is invalid. So if this particular situation is arising, this particular message will be thrown from your system that this exception has occurred. So as a programmer, you have to throw exception as per your specific requirement, and that exception message will be printed by the system and the program will be terminated. Now, if some exception is thrown in normal situation, because if you are using try catch block, in that case exception will be thrown, and if that exception is thrown, it cannot be ignored, it should be handled, because for that purpose you have put the try block. So in that case, different catch blocks will be matched, and those different catch block will be matched with the exception which has been thrown, and the matching one will be executed. Now one thing here we have to take care of, one catch is there when we are writing different catch blocks. Basically one programming principle or trick is there. Basically if you are using multiple catch blocks, all the exception objects belong to one base class, that is your exception class. So here you are going to use the concept of polymorphism. The concept of polymorphism says that base class can access the derived class object referencing. So in that referencing, it is essential to order the exception objects in such a way that the exception which are lower in the hierarchy, it means the more specialized class or the class which are derived in the bottom or at the bottom level in the hierarchy, they should be put first in the exception hierarchy. Otherwise what will happen? The top level exception hierarchy classes will capture that particular exception and they will execute that code, and it may be not desirable by you to handle that particular exception in such a way. Then if you are having several specific exception of different type, and those things you are going to put in different catch blocks, then it is essential for you to write the catch block in which the ordering should be taken care, and the ordering should be that the lower level classes or the object belonging to lower level classes, if they are thrown as an exception, they should be cached in the higher level of the sequence in the catching, because it will happen from top to bottom. Throw and throws. Throw is used for throwing only one specific exceptional condition checked by the programmer, but throws is going to be used extensively in normal programming scenario, because there you can throw multiple expected exception by comma separated list, and those all different exceptions can be handled by the places where that particular method from where these throws are going to be thrown. So throws is having more wider acceptance or wider capability to provide the exception handling mechanism, and throws obviously is going to be providing you only one instance or only one place or only one object of the throw that can be handled in the programming. As I discussed about multiple catch scenarios, multiple try catch block you can have. In order to catch the block, it is very important when there are multiple catches block, then ordering should be very clearly taken care. When exception generated, the JVM search the catch block in order, and that order is from the bottom level or from lower level in the hierarchy of the exception classes to higher level hierarchy in the exception classes. Similarly, if you are having your own exception, for example, suppose you are going to have your own exception classes. Then also you see that from which class you are deriving and what level of the hierarchy your own exception will be there, and accordingly you manage that particular exception handling in the different catch block situations. So obviously the catch block will be executed only if that particular specific matching is there, or it is of the type that particular is compatible with the thrown exception type. So that compatibility will be checked by the compiler, and it will be deciding that which particular block is going to be executed as per the thrown object or thrown exception object from the try block. So here exception 1, exception 2, exception 3 are 3 different exceptions, and here you can say that exception 1 should be lower in the hierarchy. Similarly, exception 2 will be either at the same level or at the higher level in the hierarchy. Similarly, exception 3 should be either at the same level or at the highest level in the hierarchy. So that particular thing you have to take care, then only you can manage the exceptions in your programming skill, and more practice will help you to handle different kind of exceptional situations in your program. So with this, I just summarize the session here, and I try to recap what actually we discussed in this particular session. We discussed about that what actually exception is, how Java provide us capability to manage exception, what is the use of try, catch and finally block, and for what we should try to attempt to write the exception handling code, and for what we should not write to handle the exception handling code. These all things we have to take care, and accordingly we have to manage the exceptions in our programming. So enjoy the programming, try to learn different things in your programming skills, and I tell you one thing again repeatedly, I am telling this particular in several classes, that this is the stage where you refresh yourself, you prepare yourself for your future goal and objectives. So learn Java, try to learn a bit every day, try to live basically, try to think about different kind of problem situation whenever you are having some time, and try to learn that particular and try to see how you can do better in learning and your study, because you are going to pursue further in your study. In next coming semesters you will be more exposed towards the Java skill. Advanced Java courses in your 5th semester, especially for the MCA students I am telling. So keep in mind that whatever you are learning today, that is going to pay your dividend in your 5th semester and even subsequent professional life of your dream. So in that case, it is better to practice, to learn more, to try to be equipped with different concepts and tools which are available. So try to follow that. And in the last, before I conclude this session, I will say that whenever you are doing your assignments, your assignment is one of the important activity. Whenever you are doing your assignment, just don't read study material and try to reproduce it. You have to do a lot of thinking. Your assignments are designed in such a way that it not only test your reading skill, that you have read the content and you can do, it also test your skills of different kind of technical implementation, how smart you can think, what are the tricks you can apply to solve different problems. So those all things you see and you try to do that. So happy learning, all the best.